Chapter 311, Halveth. The city of Halveth was a living, breathing beast of stone and flesh. Its streets pulsed with life, from the clatter of hooves on cobblestones to the shouts of merchants hawking wares in the bustling marketplaces. Smoke from blacksmiths' forges mingled with the aroma of roasted meat and fresh-baked bread, creating a scent uniquely Halvetha's, a mix of industry, trade, and survival. Through the winding streets walked a young man named Kalen Drast, his footsteps steady but unhurried. At 20, he was fresh to the world of mercenary work, his armor still bearing the polished sheen of newness, his sword strapped to his side a little too perfectly positioned, betraying his inexperience. Yet his strides carried determination, a hint of the fire that had driven him to leave his quiet village and seek his fortune among the hardened fighters and hired blades of Halveth. The city had drawn him like a moth to a flame. Halveth was famous for its mercenaries, a hub where warriors, adventurers, and sellswords converged. The low taxes on mercenary contracts, the constant flow of trading caravans, and the near-endless demand for protection and muscle made it the perfect breeding ground for a young hopeful like Kalen. As he passed through the crowded streets, Kalen couldn't help but marvel at the sights around him. Mercenaries of all shapes and sizes loitered at taverns, their mismatched armor and weapons a testament to their many battles. Veterans sat at tables, swapping exaggerated tales of heroism, their laughter booming over the din of the street. Others sharpened blades, their faces grim and focused, while younger mercenaries like him hurried to guild postings, eager to secure their next job. "Watch it, boy," a grizzled dwarf barked, nearly spilling his tankard of ale as Kalen sidestepped a cart laden with barrels. The young man mumbled an apology, his cheeks coloring slightly, and continued on his way. The mercenary guild loomed ahead, a large, fortress-like structure with banners fluttering in the wind, each marked with the sigil of a sword crossed with a quill. The building was Halvetha's pride, a testament to its unique role as a haven for mercenaries. Inside, contracts were drawn, disputes settled, and reputations made or broken. Kalen adjusted the strap of his satchel and straightened his back as he approached the guild's grand doors. Carved from heavy oak, the doors bore intricate reliefs of famous mercenaries locked in battle, their deeds immortalized in the wood. With a deep breath, he pushed one of the doors open and stepped inside. The interior was bustling, filled with the sounds of voices, the clink of coins, and the faint scratch of quills on parchment. The guild hall was vast, with high ceilings supported by thick wooden beams. A massive board dominated one wall, covered in notices and contracts ranging from caravan escorts to monster subjugations. Mercenaries crowded around it, some pointing at postings, others arguing over who had the right to claim a job. Kalen hesitated for a moment, taking it all in. He had been here only once before, to register as a member. Today, however, he was here for his first real contract. New blood, huh? A voice cut through his thoughts. He turned to see a tall, lean man leaning casually against a pillar. The man's armor was scratched and battered, his short-cropped hair streaked with gray despite his youthful face. "You've got that wide-eyed look about you. First job?" Kalen nodded, trying not to let his nerves show. "Yeah. Any tips?" The man chuckled, his sharp blue eyes gleaming. "Plenty, but you wouldn't listen to half of them. Just make sure you read the fine print on those contracts. Guild won't save your skin if you sign up for something beyond your ability." "Thanks for the advice," Kalen said, offering a small smile before moving toward the board. He scanned the notices, his heart pounding as he read each one. Some were straightforward, guarding caravans or delivering messages. Others were more dangerous, involving hunting down bandits or dealing with beasts that plagued the nearby forests. Finally, his eyes landed on a posting that seemed manageable. Escort needed for a merchant caravan heading to Valford. 7 days' travel. Pay, 20 silver pieces upon safe arrival. It wasn't glamorous, but it was a start. Kalen reached for the notice, only to have his hand intercepted by another. A burly man with a thick beard and a scar running down his cheek. The man's lips twisted into a smirk as he plucked the posting off the board. "Sorry, kid. Too slow." Kalen clenched his fists but forced himself to stay calm. "I saw it first." Kalen's jaw tightened as he stared at the burly man, who now held the contract smugly in his hand. His first instinct was to argue, to demand his right to take the job he'd already chosen, but his eyes drifted to the tattoo on the man's forearm, partially visible beneath his rolled-up sleeve. A snarling dog's head, inked in black and red, marked his skin, a symbol as infamous as the man himself. It was the sign of the Mad Dogs, the most troublesome mercenary group in Helveth. They were notorious for their ruthlessness and their complete disregard for any sense of law or order. While most mercenaries operated independently, the Mad Dogs worked as a tightly knit group, their strength and unity allowing them to dominate jobs, intimidate rivals, and get away with actions that would see others cast out of the guild, or worse. Kalen's resolve wavered. He knew their reputation. Everyone did. These weren't the kind of people you crossed unless you wanted your life to take a very sharp turn for the worse. Even the guild, with all its rules and regulations, seemed reluctant to rein them in. Rumor had it that each member of the Mad Dogs was strong enough to lead a team of their own, but they chose to band together, making them a force few dared challenge. The burly man, noticing Kalen's hesitation, grinned. It was the grin of someone who knew exactly the effect his presence had on others. "What's the matter, boy? Something caught your eye?" Kalen glanced down at the tattoo, and then quickly looked away. His heart was pounding, a mix of anger and frustration boiling in his chest. He wanted to say something, to stand his ground, but his practical side screamed at him to back off. Starting a fight with a mad dog over a simple escort job wasn't just foolish, it was suicidal. "Nothing," Kalen muttered, forcing the words through clenched teeth. "Good," the man said, his grin widening as he folded the contract and slipped it into his belt. "Keep it that way. Wouldn't want you biting off more than you can chew." Kalen stepped back, swallowing his pride as the man walked away, his heavy boots thudding against the wooden floor. Around them, other mercenaries watched, some with curiosity, others with knowing smirks. It wasn't the first time a new recruit had been pushed around by the Mad Dogs, and it certainly wouldn't be the last. The lean man from earlier, Dane, approached Kalen again, his expression sympathetic but wary. "Tough break, kid. But you did the right thing." Kalen turned to him, his frustration bubbling over. "How is backing down the right thing?" "That was my contract." "Because you're still breathing," Dane said bluntly, crossing his arms. "The Mad Dogs don't play fair. If you'd pushed it, you'd be lucky to leave here with just a broken nose. But why does the guild let them get away with it?" Kalen demanded, his voice low but heated. "They're supposed to enforce the rules." Dane sighed, glancing around to ensure no one was listening too closely. "Look, the guild's not blind. They know exactly what the Mad Dogs are like. But here's the thing, they get results. When a contract's too dangerous for anyone else, they take it. When a job's a mess and needs someone who doesn't care about collateral damage, they're the ones people turn to. That doesn't justify letting them do whatever they want," Kalen argued, his fists still clenched. "It doesn't," Dane agreed, his tone softening. "But power talks, kid. And they've got plenty of it. The guild doesn't want to risk losing them, so they turn a blind eye as long as the dogs don't push too far." Kalen looked back toward the board, now feeling the weight of his inexperience more keenly than ever. He had come here to prove himself, to take his first step as a mercenary, but already the world of Helveth's hired blades was showing its teeth. Dane clapped him on the shoulder, pulling him from his thoughts. "Don't let it get to you. This city's tough, but there's always another job. And next time, maybe don't pick the same posting as one of them." Kalen forced a small nod, though his frustration remained. I wish someone would one day show them their place." Just as he wished, the door opened. Chapter 312. Helveth, 2. Creak. The door opened. It was not particularly loud or anything. It just happened that Kalen was looking at the door at that time. Kalen's gaze lingered on the door as it creaked open, almost as if his unspoken wish had summoned something, or someone. The bustling noise of the guild seemed to fade for a moment as a figure stepped through, cloaked in dark fabric that fluttered slightly with the motion. The figure's movements were deliberate, not hurried yet not hesitant either, exuding a quiet confidence that immediately drew Kalen's attention. The young mercenary frowned slightly, realizing he didn't recognize the person. Over the past week of frequent visits to the guild, Kalen had familiarized himself with many of the regulars, from seasoned veterans to fellow newcomers like himself. This stranger wasn't one of them. That left only two possibilities. Either they were a client looking to hire or another mercenary, but one clearly from out of town. The figure paused just inside the door, surveying the room with a detached air before pulling back their hood. The dark cloak slipped away to reveal a man with sharp, angular features. His face was pale but unremarkable at first glance. Average, almost forgettable, if not for the quiet intensity in his demeanor. However, as Kalen's eyes traveled upward, they caught on two things that immediately set this man apart. The first was his eyes, pitch black and slightly unnatural. There was no glimmer, only an unsettling void that seemed to swallow light. They weren't the eyes of someone afflicted or weak, though. Instead, they carried an unyielding focus, a calm yet disquieting presence that made Kalen's breath hitch momentarily. The second was a long scar running diagonally across his right eye, stark and jagged against his otherwise smooth skin. It was the kind of mark that told a story of survival, a battle fought and barely won. Yet, despite the obvious injury, the man's posture betrayed no weakness or hesitation. Kalen blinked, forcing himself to look away before he stared too long. There were plenty of strange sights in Helveth, and he reminded himself not to dwell on them. Still, something about this man unnerved him in a way he couldn't quite explain. He wasn't outwardly threatening, no bulky armor or oversized weapon. Yet his very presence seemed to shift the atmosphere in the guild, drawing glances and murmurs from others. Kalen leaned against the nearby wall, his arms crossed, as he watched the stranger make his way toward the receptionist's desk. With nothing else to occupy his time, his only job opportunity stolen by the Mad Dog mercenary, he had little else to do but observe. The stranger moved with an air of calm purpose, weaving through the bustling hall with an ease that made others instinctively step aside. The receptionist, a sharp-featured woman named Mira, was perched behind the desk. Mira was well known among the mercenaries for her no-nonsense attitude and meticulous organization. She rarely minced words and was quick to dismiss anyone who didn't meet the guild's standards. The stranger reached the desk, placing his hands lightly on the counter. His voice was calm but firm, carrying just enough volume to cut through the noise around them. "I'm looking to hire a group of mercenaries." Mira glanced up from her ledger, raising an eyebrow as she surveyed him. "You've come to the right place. But first, let's get the basics out of the way. What kind of job are we talking about?" "A cleanup job, let's say." Myra's pen paused mid-scratch as the stranger's words registered. Her sharp eyes flicked up from the ledger, narrowing slightly. "A cleanup job, huh?" she said, her tone neutral but carrying an edge. Around her, a few nearby mercenaries stilled, their ears perking up despite themselves. The term wasn't uncommon in Helveth, but it carried a weight that everyone in the guild understood. Cleanup jobs were rarely glamorous. They often involved rooting out bandit dens, clearing dangerous beasts, or wiping out groups that someone powerful wanted gone. Quietly. These jobs came with high risks and even higher moral ambiguity, something that didn't sit well with everyone. But in the world of mercenaries, coin spoke louder than ethics. "That's going to be expensive," Mira continued, setting her pen down and, "That's going to be expensive," Mira continued, setting her pen down and folding her hands atop the desk. "How many people are you looking to hire?" 20, the stranger replied evenly, his tone unchanging. A soft murmur rippled through the mercenaries gathered nearby. Even Mira raised an eyebrow at the number, her sharp features hardening into skepticism. 20 mercenaries for a cleanup job? That's not a request you hear every day. She leaned back slightly in her chair, her fingers drumming against the wood of the desk. "You do realize that even assembling a group that size, let alone paying them, is no small matter." "I'm aware," the man said, his black eyes unflinching. "But the job warrants it, does it?" Mira pressed, her tone sharpening slightly. "You're asking for a small army. That means either the target's bigger than most bandit groups, or you're hiding something." The stranger remained calm, his posture unchanging. The target is large enough to warrant 20. I'm willing to provide details once terms are agreed upon. Mira studied him for a moment, her eyes narrowing further. Fine. Let's talk terms. A job like this is going to cost you a fortune. 20 mercenaries, even at standard rates, would run you thousands of silver pieces. Likely more, depending on the specifics. The man reached into his cloak and produced a pouch, setting it lightly on the desk. Mira opened it and began counting the coins inside with practiced efficiency. After a moment, she frowned and set the pouch aside. This isn't even a fraction of what you'd need for a job that size, she said bluntly. You could hire 2, maybe 3 people for this amount. If you're looking for 20, you're going to need a much bigger budget. Kalen, still leaning against the wall, let out a quiet scoff. What is this guy thinking? 20 mercenaries? Does he think we're that desperate? He shook his head slightly, muttering under his breath. No way anyone here is signing up for this. The stranger didn't react to Myra's dismissal. Instead, he leaned slightly closer, lowering his voice so that only Mira, and a few eavesdroppers like Kalen, could hear. That's an advance. I'll provide the rest once the job is completed. Mira snorted, folding her arms. You think anyone here's going to trust that? Advance or not, 20 mercenaries aren't going to sign on without guarantees. You misunderstand, the stranger said calmly, his voice still firm but polite. I'm not looking for 20 random mercenaries. I'm looking for 20 capable ones. People are willing to take risks. And I suspect I'll find them here. Mira raised an eyebrow, her gaze sharp. Capable? Sure. But risks? No one here's going to risk their life on promises. Especially not for a cleanup job you're being so cagey about. Kalen's curiosity deepened despite his earlier scoffing. He watched the stranger closely, trying to gauge whether he was serious or simply desperate. The scarred man's composure didn't falter, even under Myra's scrutiny. There was something unnerving about how calm he remained, as if he already knew how this conversation would play out. The stranger remained silent for a beat, his dark eyes steady on Mira, who met his gaze with a sigh of exasperation. She leaned back in her chair, her fingers tapping against the desk rhythmically. Well, if you're dead set on finding someone who'll take a commission like this, even with your budget constraints, there is a group. Mira paused, glancing around the room, almost as if to ensure no one else was within earshot. Her voice dropped slightly as she continued, but I'll warn you, they're not exactly the most reliable. The stranger tilted his head slightly, his curiosity piqued. Who? Mira hesitated for a moment before replying, her tone heavy with skepticism. The Mad Dogs. A faint smile tugged at the corner of the stranger's lips as he repeated the name, his voice carrying a subtle undertone of amusement. Mad Dogs? Quite a name. Mira nodded, her expression darkening. Indeed. It's not just a nickname. It's a reputation. They're skilled, I'll give them that. But they're reckless, chaotic, and about as trustworthy as a viper in your boot. If you hire them, expect trouble. Trouble doesn't bother me, the stranger replied calmly, his faint smile lingering. Sometimes, it's the troublemakers who get things done. Mira narrowed her eyes, studying him for a moment. You might think that now, but I've seen clients regret working with them more times than I can count. They've got the talent to back up their bravado, but they've also got a habit of turning on their employers if the job goes south. Or if they think they're not being paid enough. The stranger leaned forward slightly, his voice dropping to a near whisper. Where can I find them? Mira sighed again, pinching the bridge of her nose as if trying to stave off a headache. They're camped just outside the city. They're not welcome within the walls for obvious reasons. But before you go running off to them, I have to ask. Are you sure about this? There are plenty of other options if you're willing to adjust your expectations. Mad Dogs, the stranger repeated, ignoring her question as he stood straight once more. Thank you for the information, Mira muttered under her breath, shaking her head as she returned to her ledger. Your funeral, Kalen, still leaning against the wall, watched as the scarred man turned and walked toward the door with that same deliberate stride, his dark cloak fluttering slightly behind him. There was something unsettling about the way he carried himself, calm, assured as if he'd already made up his mind long before entering the guild. As the door creaked shut behind the stranger, Kalen couldn't help but wonder what kind of person would willingly seek out the Mad Dogs, and what kind of job could possibly warrant it. Chapter 313, Mad Dogs. The stranger's boots crunched against the uneven dirt path as he approached the outskirts of the city. The air grew heavier with the stench of unwashed bodies and cheap ale, mixed with the faint metallic tang of rusting weapons. Makeshift tents and crude campfires dotted the area, their flickering light casting jagged shadows on the grimy surroundings. As the man stepped into the camp, conversations hushed, and the general air of debauchery stilled, replaced by a wary tension. Heads turned to look at him, some with open hostility, others with thinly veiled curiosity. A few of the rougher types licked their lips, their expressions promising trouble if he wasn't careful. The stranger ignored their stares, walking forward with the same deliberate pace he had displayed in the guild. His dark cloak billowed slightly with the motion, revealing hints of the simple but practical gear beneath. He stopped at what seemed to be the center of the camp, surrounded by a mix of lounging figures and men sharpening their weapons. Then he spoke, his voice calm but loud enough to carry through the silence. "I'm here to see the Mad Dogs. Is this the right place?" For a moment no one answered. The camp seemed frozen, as if waiting for a signal. Then a grizzled mercenary leaning against a barrel barked a laugh, his yellowed teeth glinting in the firelight. "And what if it is, you here to join or to die?" Another mercenary, this one with a scar running across his bald scalp, spat on the ground near the stranger's feet. "Got a death wish, walking in here like that? You don't look like you can afford us." A third mercenary, a wiry man with a crooked grin, added, "Maybe he's lost. Or maybe—" His grin widened, his eyes flicking to the stranger's belt. "He's carrying coin we can lighten him of." The stranger remained unfazed, his pitch-black eyes sweeping over the gathered men and women. His calm demeanor seemed to irritate them even more, the hostility in the air growing thicker. "If this isn't the right place, I'll leave," the stranger said evenly. "But if it is, then fetch your leader. I'm here to talk business, not waste time." The grizzled mercenary leaned forward, his yellowed teeth bared in a grin that promised trouble. "Our leader's a busy man, stranger. You can't just walk in here and demand to see him. There's a cost for taking up his time." The wiry mercenary with the crooked grin chimed in, his voice dripping with mockery. "That's right. Call it a guarantee. Show us you're serious or turn around and crawl back to wherever you came from." The stranger tilted his head slightly, his dark eyes narrowing but his expression otherwise calm. Slowly, he reached into his cloak and pulled out a single gold coin. Without a word, he flicked it onto the ground in front of the grizzled mercenary. "Would this be enough?" he asked evenly. The camp seemed to hold its breath for a moment as the coin clinked against the dirt, its golden sheen catching the flicker of firelight. The grizzled mercenary's eyes widened briefly before a wicked smile spread across his face. He bent down, scooping up the coin with a quick, greedy motion, then exchanged a look with the others. The wiry mercenary licked his lips, and the bald one cracked his knuckles. Well, the grizzled man drawled, his voice full of mockery. "Looks like the pup's got some bite, but—" He pocketed the coin and smirked. "You think one little coin's enough to deal with the Mad Dogs? Oh, you're in for a lesson, boy." As if on cue, the surrounding mercenaries began to rise, moving closer and tightening the circle around the stranger. Their eyes glinted with malicious intent, and their hands hovered near weapons or clenched into fists. Some chuckled darkly, while others openly jeered. The wiry mercenary leaned closer, sneering. "You've got guts, I'll give you that, but not much sense, Coming here all alone, flashing coin. What did you think was gonna happen?" The stranger remained still, his posture unchanging, as he asked calmly, "Is this how it's supposed to be?" The bald mercenary grinned, his scarred face twisted with cruel amusement. "Damn right it is. You walk into the Mad Dog's den, you play by our rules. And rule number 1, don't show weakness. The wiry one let out a cackling laugh. "It's your fault for coming here, pal. We're the mad dogs for a reason, after all. Ain't that right, boys?" A chorus of chuckles and jeers rose from the gathered mercenaries, their confidence bolstered by the stranger's apparent lack of fear. The grizzled leader stepped closer, looming over him with a smirk. "You made a mistake coming here alone," he said, his voice low and menacing. "Now let's see how deep your pockets really go." For the first time, the stranger moved, his head tilting slightly to one side as he exhaled a soft, almost disappointed sigh. "I see," he murmured, his voice barely audible but enough to quiet the laughter around him. Then he straightened, his eyes scanning the group with cold detachment. "I was under the impression I was dealing with professionals. Perhaps I was wrong." But then suddenly his mouth widened. Swoosh! Or not! As a sword was drawn. The blade, slim and razor-sharp, shone with an otherworldly black hue, shadows coiling around it like living flames. In an instant, he thrust it forward, piercing the grizzled mercenary's chest with pinpoint precision. The older man's eyes widened in shock, a strangled gasp escaping his lips as the black flames ignited from the wound, engulfing his body in an eerie, consuming blaze. "Not professionals, then," the young man murmured, his voice carrying a biting edge. He yanked his blade free, the grizzled mercenary collapsing to the ground with a dull thud, his charred body crumpling into lifelessness. "Kill him!" the bald mercenary roared, his voice trembling with both rage and fear. The wiry mercenary lunged first, his dagger gleaming as he aimed for the young man's throat. But before the blade could connect, the stranger sidestepped with a graceful pivot, his sword slicing upward in a single, fluid motion. Slash! The wiry man froze mid-step, his eyes flicking down to see a gash seared through his torso, black flames licking at the edges of the wound. He crumpled with a scream, his body consumed by the relentless fire. "Two," the young man said softly, his tone almost conversational. The next three came at him together, their weapons flashing in the firelight. An axe, a long sword, and a spiked mace. They moved with a crude but determined coordination, trying to surround him. The young man didn't hesitate. Swoosh! He ducked under the swing of the axe, his sword stabbing upward into the wielder's throat. Black flames erupted from the wound, consuming the man's head before his body hit the ground. Spinning on his heel, the stranger's blade met the downward strike of the mace, deflecting it with a sharp clang before slicing cleanly through the attacker's side. Clang! Slash! The fifth mercenary hesitated for a fraction of a second, his grip tightening on the long sword as fear flickered in his eyes. But the stranger gave him no chance to retreat. With a sudden burst of speed, he closed the distance, his blade slashing horizontally. The black flames followed the arc of the sword, engulfing the mercenary before he could even cry out. 5 bodies lay sprawled across the ground, their twisted, charred remains sending wisps of smoke into the night air. The other mercenaries, who had been so eager to jeer and mock just moments before, now stood frozen, their faces pale as they stared at the stranger. He straightened, his sword still alight with the shadowy flames, and turned his gaze to the remaining mercenaries. His smirk was gone, replaced by a cold, detached expression that sent a chill through the camp. "Anyone else?" he asked, his voice calm and almost mocking. The silence was deafening, broken only by the crackling of the black flames. "You?" And there was one person who remembered who this guy was. After all, there was only person who had used black flames while fighting. Someone whose name had spread quite far in the recent 2 months, after stirring trouble with all the people here. "Are you the sword demon?" The silence stretched, heavy and suffocating, as the last whisper of black flames died out, leaving only charred corpses and the acrid stench of burning flesh in their wake. The remaining mercenaries looked at the stranger with wide eyes, their earlier bravado replaced by a palpable fear that hung in the air like a storm cloud. "You?" one of them finally managed, his voice trembling. He pointed a shaky finger at the young man, his face pale and glistening with sweat. "You're the sword demon, aren't you?" Murmurs rippled through the crowd, mercenaries exchanging panicked glances as recognition dawned. The Sword Demon, a name that had carved itself into infamy over the past 2 months. Tales of a lone swordsman who had dared to provoke and survive a confrontation with the Cloud Heaven sect had spread like wildfire. Some whispered he was a demon himself, while others swore he was an outcast from a sect, wielding forbidden techniques. Whatever the truth, one fact was undeniable. He was dangerous. The wiry mercenary who had earlier mocked the stranger stumbled backward, clutching at his bleeding side. The Sword Demon. Here? Why the hell would he come here? The stranger's dark eyes swept over the group, cold and unfeeling, as if weighing their worth. He said nothing, letting the silence and their growing unease answer for him. The shadows of his sword still flickered faintly, casting an eerie glow against his stoic features. One of the older mercenaries, a grizzled veteran with a patch over one eye, stepped forward, his voice gruff but tinged with apprehension. If you're really him, then what the hell do you want with us? You didn't come here just to make a mess of my camp, did you? The stranger tilted his head slightly, his expression unreadable. I told you when I arrived. I'm here to see the Mad Dogs. Now, fetch your leader before I decide to finish what I started. The threat wasn't loud or overt, but it carried a weight that made the remaining mercenaries flinch. The grizzled veteran nodded stiffly, turning to one of his subordinates and jerking his thumb toward the largest tent in the camp. Go get Zirkle. Now! Chapter 314. Mad Dogs. 2. The subordinate didn't hesitate, sprinting off toward the tent as if his life depended on it. The rest of the mercenaries kept their distance, some dropping their weapons, others retreating toward the edges of the camp, unwilling to test their luck against the man who had so effortlessly dispatched 5 of their own. Minutes later, heavy footsteps announced Zirkle's arrival. The leader of the Mad Dogs emerged from his tent, his fiery red hair and scarred face unmistakable. He wore a sleeveless leather jerkin that revealed his muscular arms, and his mismatched eyes, one a sharp amber, the other milky white from an old injury, surveyed the scene with a mixture of annoyance and curiosity. What the hell is going on here? Zirkle barked, his voice like the crack of a whip. His gaze fell on the bodies sprawled across the ground, then shifted to the stranger standing amidst the carnage, his shadowy sword still in hand. Zirkle's lips twisted into a smirk. Well, looks like we've got ourselves a guest. The stranger sheathed his blade in a fluid motion, the flames extinguishing as he did so. He met Zirkle's gaze without flinching, his voice calm and unwavering. Zirkle, leader of the Mad Dogs. I've come to hire you and your men for a job. Zirkle barked a laugh, his broad shoulders shaking. You've got some nerve walking in here and cutting down my men, then asking for a favor. You're either insane or suicidal. Neither, the stranger replied coolly. I'm practical. I don't waste time negotiating with dogs who can't listen. Your men had their chance to act like professionals. They failed. Zirkle's smirk widened, a glint of amusement in his amber eye. And what makes you think I'll work for someone who thinks he can waltz into my camp and start swinging his sword around like he owns the place? The stranger laughed softly, a smirk curling his lips as he locked eyes with Zirkle. Why not? It's not like you and your men don't thrive on this kind of thing. Zirkle's smirk faltered slightly, his amber eye narrowing as he took a step closer. And what exactly do you mean by that? The stranger spread his hands, his dark eyes glinting with faint amusement. Swinging your sword like you own the place. Isn't that how the strong act? Isn't that why you're called the Mad Dogs? Because you don't bow to anyone, you take what you want, and you live by your own rules. Zirkle's mismatched gaze hardened, his fists clenching at his sides. The truth in the stranger's words struck a nerve. It was their way, chaos and violence as a creed, strength as their only currency. It was why the Mad Dogs existed, why they were feared, and why Zirkle had clawed his way to the top to lead them. But Zirkle's pride burned hotter than any truth. He wasn't about to let this smug bastard throw their philosophy back at him. Not when the corpses of his men still smoldered on the ground. You've got guts. I'll give you that, Zirkle said, his voice low and edged with danger. But don't think you can walk in here and lecture me like some high and mighty preacher. You just butchered my men like they were nothing. You think I'll let that slide? The stranger's smirk didn't waver. If you falter now, then maybe you should. How could you call yourself their leader if you can't stand up to someone stronger? Zirkel's jaw tightened, and his knuckles cracked as his fists curled tighter. The stranger's words weren't just taunts. They were a challenge, provocation. But Zirkel wasn't a man easily cowed, and he wasn't about to let some outsider question his authority. There was a reason he led the Mad Dogs, a reason they followed him despite their unruly, violent nature. It wasn't because he was the loudest or the cruelest. It was because he was the strongest, the one who could hold the leash and snap it when needed. Zirkel let out a short bark of laughter, his smirk returning. You've got some nerve, sword demon. But if you think you can walk in here, spill blood, and turn me into your lapdog, you're even crazier than I thought. I have been called that a lot. Zirkel's smirk deepened, his fiery red hair catching the light of the campfires as he stared down the stranger. You've been called crazy a lot. Huh? Makes sense. Only a lunatic would pull what you just did. The sword demon chuckled, his voice low and dry. Not wrong. Zirkel's smirk turned into a grimace, his fiery amber eye burning with anger as he took a step forward, his imposing frame casting a long shadow over the stranger. The murmurs in the camp ceased entirely, and all eyes locked onto their leader. The tension in the air thickened like a storm about to break. You've shown what you can do, Zirkel growled, his voice low but brimming with barely contained rage. And you think that's enough? You think killing a handful of my men makes you untouchable? The stranger tilted his head slightly, his calm demeanor a stark contrast to Zirkel's building fury. Not untouchable, just strong enough to make you submit. The words hung in the air like a spark near kindling. For a moment, silence reigned as the meaning settled over the gathered mercenaries. Then Zirkel let out a booming laugh, a harsh, mocking sound that carried through the camp. Submit? To you? Zirkel said, his laughter subsiding into a sneer. What kind of nonsense is that? You think we bow our heads just because someone's strong? Is that what your golden spoon upbringing taught you? The stranger's eyes narrowed slightly, but his smirk remained in place. Heh! Bold of you to assume that I was born with a golden spoon. Zirkel's laughter faded, replaced by a sharp, skeptical glare. He leaned closer, his amber eye narrowing as he studied the stranger. If you weren't born with a golden spoon, then what? What else explains the way you walk in here, acting like you own the place? The crowd of mercenaries stirred uneasily, their attention bouncing between their leader and the stranger, whose calm demeanor hadn't wavered. I've seen plenty of men like you, Zirkel continued, his voice dripping with disdain. Arrogant, smug bastards who think the world owes them something because they've got power. Most of them born rich, flaunting their golden spoons like they earned it. And you? You're no different. Strong or not, you reek of the same rot inside. The stranger's smirk softened, though his dark eyes remained sharp, almost amused by Zirkel's words. He folded his arms across his chest, his posture relaxed despite the tension simmering in the air. Is that what you think? He asked, his voice calm, almost conversational. That power always comes from privilege. That anyone strong enough to walk into this den of yours and challenge you must have been handed everything on a silver platter. Zirkel's scowl deepened, his fists clenching. Don't talk to me like I'm a fool. I've clawed my way out of the gutter, fought tooth and nail to lead these men. I know the difference between earned strength and the kind that's bought or stolen. You might have skill, sword demon, but that attitude of yours stinks of entitlement. The stranger chuckled softly, the sound low and dry, as if Zirkel's words had hit something close to the truth but not quite. You've fought your way here. Good. That means you know what it takes to survive. But if you think I haven't done the same, you're sorely mistaken. Zirkel raised an eyebrow, his curiosity piqued despite himself. Oh? Then enlighten me. If you didn't come from a golden spoon, where the hell does someone like you come from? Wanna see? Then let's do it your way. And since lunatics seem to thrive in places like this, I'll cut to the chase. I request the Iron Circle. The moment his words left his mouth, Zirkel's eyes were widened. Iron Circle. The camp fell silent. Whispers spread through the gathered mercenaries, their faces shifting from curiosity to shock. The Iron Circle was not a challenge thrown lightly, even among the most hardened fighters. Zirkel narrowed his amber eye, suspicion and intrigue flickering in his expression. The Iron Circle? You really are insane. You know what that means, don't you? I do, the stranger said calmly. One weapon, one circle, and no room to run. Pure skill, strength, and will. Isn't that what you respect? Zirkel's smirk returned, this time tinged with something darker. Anticipation. You've got some nerve, really? But don't think I'll go easy on you just because you've got a fancy nickname. The stranger stepped forward, his posture relaxed but his presence radiating quiet intensity. I wouldn't expect anything less. Zirkel barked another laugh, turning to his men. Clear the center. Draw the circle. This bastard wants the Iron Circle, so let's show him what it means to fight a mad dog. The mercenaries scrambled to obey, clearing a space in the middle of the camp. Using the flat of a sword, one of them scraped a large circle into the dirt, its radius measured by the combined length of Zirkel's shoulders and the heavy battle axe he carried. Zirkel stepped into the circle, his massive frame looming over the stranger. His fiery red hair gleamed in the firelight as he hefted his axe onto his shoulder. You better have picked your weapon carefully, sword demon. You won't get a second chance. The stranger removed his cloak, revealing a lean but muscular frame and a long estoc strapped to his body. He unsheathed it with a fluid motion, its polished blade gleaming. His movements were precise, every motion deliberate and calm. The referee, a wiry man with a scar across his cheek, stepped forward. The rules of the Iron Circle are simple, he announced. Each fighter gets one weapon of their choice. The circle is your battlefield. Step out and you lose. No mana, no tricks. Fight until one of you can't stand. Chapter 3:15. Mad Dogs. 3. Just as Lucavion was walking towards the chamber, Vitaliera was watching everything unfolding right before her eyes. The murmurs of the mad dogs carried on the breeze, half awe, half challenge. But he paid them no mind. His focus remained sharp, the weight of the moment pressing against him. Vitaliera approached quietly, her presence a soft whisper against the tension brimming in the air. Her tail flicked lazily behind her as she gazed at him, her expression unreadable. Lucavion, why are you doing this? She asked, her voice tinged with a mixture of curiosity and concern. What could drive you to such lengths to bring them under your command? Lucavion smirked faintly, his dark eyes glinting with faint amusement as he tilted his head toward her. Why, he thought, his words forming silently in his mind. Because these lunatics are exactly the kind of people I need. His gaze swept over the camp, where men whispered nervously but still held the gleam of defiance in their eyes. Even after I cut down 4 of their own in front of them, they're still looking for a fight. Most would have run, but not these idiots. They see death as an invitation. You admire that? Vitaliera pressed, her tone sharper now as she watched him. What could you possibly need them for? These broken men. Lucavion paused, his smirk fading slightly as his thoughts took on a more serious tone. For what else, Vitaliera? For the promise I made to you. Her expression shifted, her golden eyes narrowing slightly as surprise flickered across her face. The promise. When we first met, he reminded her, his mind's voice softening as the memory stirred. I told you I'd go to the Azure Blossom sect, that I'd save what remains of them. His gaze lingered on hers, unflinching. I don't make promises lightly, and I don't break them either, no matter how much trouble they might bring me. Vitaliera's breath hitched slightly, and her usual sharp retorts faltered as the weight of his words settled over her. Even after all this time, you make it sound like too much time has passed. Well, it has been nearly a year. Time sure flies. In any case, I really thought you had forgotten about that. I did not. There were just some more pressing matters, that was it. Now that I have time, why not? Vitaliera sighed softly, her golden eyes flickering as she observed the unruly camp of mad dogs. "What is this iron circle you're stepping into?" she asked, her voice a blend of curiosity and faint exasperation. Her tail swayed lazily, betraying her intrigue even as her tone suggested she expected another of Lucavion's peculiar explanations. Lucavion paused, the faint smirk on his face tightening as he stepped closer to the center of the camp. His thoughts moved like quicksilver. The Iron Circle, a relic of soldiers hardened by war, where brute strength and survival instincts ruled. A tradition born in the military, taken to extremes by mercenaries. The memory of bloodied fists and the echo of wild laughter resurfaced in his mind. The soldiers used to call it entertainment in hell. And here I am, walking into it like it's a stroll through a park. He mused dryly, his expression betraying no such sentiment. Lucavion's gaze rested on Zirkle, unwavering despite the growing tension in the camp. Around him, the murmurs of the mercenaries formed a background hum, but his focus was singular, locked onto the mad dog's leader. As the massive axe rested against Zirkle's shoulder, its brutal weight a promise of devastation in the confines of the Iron Circle, Lucavion's mind churned with calculated thoughts. "It's a game," he mused silently, his dark eyes narrowing as he evaluated the man before him. A spectacle meant to solidify authority through strength. A relic of simpler minds who mistake raw power for control. Zirkle's mocking grin widened as he hefted his axe, the heavy blade glinting wickedly in the firelight. "Your sword might look fancy," he jeered, "but in here, it's the weapon that claims the space. And my axe is made for places like this." Lucavion tilted his head slightly, the faintest smirk curling his lips. True, the small circle favors his reach. One wide sweep and he can dominate the entire radius. For someone who lacks finesse, it's perfect. His hand flexed briefly on the hilt of his estoc, the polished blade designed for precision rather than brute strength. But for me, such trivialities are just challenges waiting to be overcome. He could almost feel Vitalyara's exasperation as her voice floated through his thoughts. "You call this a game? This isn't strategy, it's madness. A closed space where his strength will reign supreme. You can't outlast him in sheer force." "Ah, but that's where you're wrong, Vitalyara," he countered inwardly, his amusement sharpening. "This circle doesn't favor the strongest weapon. It favors the one with the sharpest mind." The referee's voice cut through the thick air. "Begin." The moment the word was spoken, Zirkle lunged forward with shocking speed for a man his size, his axe carving a lethal arc through the air. The crowd roared as Lucavion sidestepped, the blade missing him by a hair's breadth. He moved fluidly, his every step calculated, his every motion deliberate. Heavy weapons always overcommit, he thought, watching as Zirkle's momentum carried him a half-step too far. All it takes is the right angle. Swoosh! Lucavion's estoc drove cleanly into Zirkle's side, the sharp tip piercing bare flesh with unnerving precision. Zirkle let out a guttural groan, his body jerking back as blood trickled down his side. He staggered slightly but managed to steady himself, his amber eye blazing with fury. The crowd erupted into shouts and gasps, a chaotic symphony of disbelief and excitement. "Stab! Damn you!" Zirkle growled, spitting blood as he swung his axe in a wild arc, aiming to cleave Lucavion in two. Lucavion didn't flinch. He stepped back just enough to let the blade pass harmlessly in front of him, the heavy weapon whistling through the air with deadly force. Zirkle's momentum left him open for another instant, and Lucavion capitalized immediately, driving the hilt of his estoc into Zirkle's ribs, forcing another groan of pain from the larger man. He fights like a beast, Lucavion thought, his dark eyes narrowing as he circled his opponent. Strength and rage honed by instinct and sheer survival. But instincts are predictable. Zirkle's mind raced, frustration mounting with every exchange. How is this bastard this good? He thought, his breaths coming in sharp bursts. He moves like he's been in the Iron Circle before. Does he know how to fight here? The Iron Circle was Zirkle's domain, the very symbol of his dominance. He had survived 10 of these brutal, bare-knuckled fights, each one a testament to his strength and resilience. It was in this arena that he had killed the previous leader of the Mad Dogs, seizing his place at the top. The scars on his body bore witness to the countless battles he had endured to maintain his authority. But now, facing this stranger, this so-called sword demon, Zirkle felt something he hadn't experienced in years: doubt. Lucavion's strikes weren't just fast. They were precise, each one exploiting the smallest openings in Zirkle's defense. Every swing of Zirkle's axe felt heavier, slower, as if he were fighting not just Lucavion but his own mounting exhaustion. Meanwhile, Lucavion moved with the ease of a predator, each step calculated, each feint designed to throw Zirkle off balance. Zirkle tightened his grip on his axe, the rough wooden handle digging into his calloused palms. No, I fought too hard, spilled too much blood to lose to this bastard. I've killed men twice as strong. I'll kill him too. With a roar, Zirkle lunged forward, feinting a high strike before pivoting into a sweeping low attack aimed at Lucavion's legs. It was a clever move, one that had felled many opponents before. But Lucavion saw through it, leaping effortlessly over the arc of the blade and twisting midair to land a shallow cut across Zirkle's shoulder. The pain was sharp and immediate, but Zirkle ignored it, turning on his heel and swinging his axe upward in a desperate bid to catch Lucavion off guard. The stranger ducked, the blade passing inches above his head, and stepped in close, driving his elbow into Zirkle's exposed ribs. The force sent Zirkle staggering, his breath hitching as pain flared in his side. The crowd roared louder, the mercenaries caught between awe and disbelief. Zirkle, the undefeated leader of the Mad Dogs, was being outmatched. Is that all the Iron Circle has to offer? Lucavion taunted, his voice calm and cutting. He twirled his estoc lightly in his hand, its blade glinting with blood. I expected more from the man who calls himself their leader. Zirkle's teeth clenched, his vision blurring slightly as blood trickled down his torso. He spat on the ground, his amber eye blazing with defiance. You talk too much, bastard, he growled, forcing himself upright. This isn't over. Lucavion smirked faintly, his expression unreadable. No, it's not. But it will be soon. Zirkle charged again, his axe raised high, but Lucavion didn't retreat. Instead, he stepped forward, closing the distance in an instant. His estoc flashed, the blade slicing across Zirkle's thigh, forcing the larger man to stumble. Zirkle gritted his teeth, using his momentum to spin into another wild swing, but Lucavion sidestepped once more, his movements fluid and effortless. How? Zirkle thought, his frustration boiling over. How does he know exactly where to strike? Exactly how to move? Lucavion's calm, unrelenting precision was a stark contrast to Zirkle's raw, brutal power. It was clear now that this was no ordinary opponent. The stranger fought as if he had been in the Iron Circle 100 times, as if he had studied and mastered its brutal, confined chaos. With each exchange, Zirkle felt his strength waning, his breathing growing heavier. Lucavion, meanwhile, remained unervingly composed, his movements as sharp and deliberate as ever. And then, with one final, decisive strike, Lucavion drove his estoc into Zirkle's shoulder, forcing him to drop his axe. The massive weapon clattered to the ground, its weight a stark reminder of the power Zirkle could no longer wield. Zirkle fell to one knee, blood dripping from his wounds as he glared up at Lucavion. The stranger stood over him, his estoc poised to strike again, but he didn't move. Instead, he looked down at Zirkle, his dark eyes unreadable. Anyone else who wants to try? As the crowd were silent, a wide smirk appeared on Lucavion's face. Good. Now, let me tell you why I am here for. Chapter 316, Thornridge. The guild was quieter in the evening, though it still buzzed with the subdued hum of mercenaries sharing drinks, swapping stories, and occasionally eyeing the job board. Lamps cast a warm glow over the wooden beams, and the faint scent of spilled ale and smoke lingered in the air. Kalen sat at a small table near the wall, nursing a half-empty mug. His earlier frustration had dulled into a simmering annoyance, though the encounter with the scarred stranger still lingered in his mind. Who was that man, And what kind of job could possibly need 20 mercenaries? He sighed, running a hand through his hair. Mira was still at her desk, her sharp eyes flicking across the room as she meticulously recorded the day's contracts. Her pen scratched against parchment in a steady rhythm, the sound blending into the background noise. She looked up occasionally, her gaze sweeping the hall, but she seemed just as baffled as Kalen had felt earlier. The door creaked open again, and Kalen instinctively glanced toward it. This time, his reaction was immediate, a sharp intake of breath, followed by a tightening in his chest. The stranger had returned, but he wasn't alone. Behind him, Zirkle, the infamous leader of the Mad Dogs, stepped into the guild. His rough, battered appearance was unmistakable: scarred face, disheveled hair, and armor that looked like it had been through one too many battles. Yet what stood out most was the grin splitting his face, wide and almost predatory, as if he had just won a particularly satisfying gamble. The sight of Zirkle smiling was enough to make Kalen's stomach twist. Nothing good ever came of a mad dog in high spirits. The guild hall seemed to collectively freeze, every eye locking onto the pair as they made their way toward Myra's desk. Even Mira, who rarely showed emotion, straightened in her seat, her brows furrowing as they approached. "Evening, Mira," Zirkle drawled, his voice carrying a rough but amused edge. "Hope you've got some parchment ready." Myra's eyes flicked between him and the scarred stranger, her expression carefully neutral. "Zirkle, didn't expect to see you back here so soon. What's this about?" Zirkle slapped a heavy hand on the counter, leaning forward slightly. "This man," he said, jerking a thumb toward the stranger, "and I have come to an agreement. He's got himself a job, and the Mad Dogs are ready to take it." The murmurs started almost immediately, whispers rippling through the gathered mercenaries. Kalen could barely believe what he was hearing. Zirkle? Accepting terms from anyone? The Mad Dogs weren't exactly known for being cooperative, let alone working under someone else's conditions. Mira leaned back in her chair, her sharp gaze narrowing. "Is that so? And what's changed since this morning? Last I heard, this guy didn't have nearly enough to pay for 20 mercenaries." Zirkle's grin widened, his teeth glinting in the lamplight. "Let's just say he made a compelling argument." The scarred stranger remained silent, standing a step behind Zirkle with his usual calm composure. His pitch-black eyes surveyed the room, unbothered by the attention or the whispers. Kalen couldn't shake the feeling that the man had orchestrated this entire situation, that every step, from the initial conversation with Mira to this moment, had gone exactly as he intended. Myra's gaze shifted to the stranger. "You're the one making all these bold requests. Mind explaining how you convinced him?" The stranger met her eyes evenly. "I provided him with the details he required. The terms are acceptable to both parties." "Terms?" Mira echoed, her tone skeptical. "You expect me to believe Zirkle agreed to follow someone else's terms?" Zirkle let out a low chuckle, leaning back and crossing his arms. "Oh, don't look so surprised, Mira. Even the Mad Dogs know a good deal when we see one. And this guy? He's got guts, brains, and a job that's just the right kind of challenge." Mira exhaled sharply, her irritation evident. "Fine, let's get this over with." She reached for a fresh piece of parchment, her pen poised. "Name?" The stranger stepped forward, his voice steady. "You can refer to me as Lucavion." Kalen's ears perked up at the name, though it meant nothing to him. Still, it felt significant, as if it held weight beyond the simplicity of its sound. Or was that the case really? Myra's pen scratched against the parchment with deliberate precision, her expression a mask of focus as she worked. The murmurs in the guild hall had quieted somewhat, though the tension was still palpable. Every so often, Myra's sharp gaze flicked up toward Zirkle and Lucavion, as if confirming they were real and not some bizarre figment of her imagination. Kalen, still seated at his table, crossed his arms and scowled into his mug. Finally, maybe this will mean less chaos around here. He couldn't help but steal glances at the pair. Zirkle's grin hadn't faltered, while Lucavion stood calm and detached, his dark eyes taking in everything and giving nothing in return. Mira, meanwhile, sighed as she wrote the last few words on the parchment and set her pen down with a quiet clink. She slid the document across the counter toward Zirkle. All right, it's done. Standard guild terms apply. You're responsible for your own casualties, and any disputes are to be handled through the guild's arbitration system. Zirkle snorted, the sound rough but amused. Casualties? Mira, you wound me. We're professionals. I'm not the one you need to convince, she replied dryly, nodding toward Lucavion. Zirkle didn't bother hiding his amusement as he scrawled his signature across the parchment. The bold, jagged letters a perfect match for his larger-than-life persona. With a flourish, he slid the contract back across the counter. All set, Zirkle said, turning to Lucavion with a grin that could have belonged to a wolf. See you at dawn, boss. Lucavion gave the faintest of nods. Be ready. Without another word, the scarred man turned and strode toward the door, his dark cloak swirling behind him. Zirkle followed with his usual swagger, his presence like a storm leaving the room. The other mercenaries parted instinctively, no one willing to risk even a brush against the infamous leader of the Mad Dogs. Kalen watched them go, his shoulders relaxing slightly as the door creaked shut behind them. The tension in the guild hall seemed to ease instantly, conversations resuming in low tones as people tried to make sense of what had just happened. Finally, Kalen muttered under his breath. He glanced toward the job board, his earlier frustration replaced by a flicker of hope. With Zirkle and the Mad Dogs off chasing Lucavion's mysterious job, maybe he'd have a chance at reclaiming the posting that had been snatched from him this morning. It wasn't glamorous, but it was honest work, and far safer than anything involving the Mad Dogs. Kalen drained the last of his drink and pushed himself to his feet. The board was less crowded now, with most mercenaries having already settled in for the evening. He scanned the remaining notices, his eyes searching for the familiar posting about the caravan escort to Valford. And there it was. A wide grin spread across his face. The notice was still pinned to the board, untouched since the burly Mad Dog had claimed it earlier. Kalen reached for it, the thought of finally having a chance to prove himself. I am really lucky. The fact that I was able to get this without losing anything. The city of Thornridge sprawled across the base of the Great Cliffs, its stone walls weathered by centuries of cold northern winds. For a city governed by a mere baron, its bustling streets and well-paved avenues spoke of prosperity uncommon for settlements this close to the Arcanese Empire's border. Thornridge thrived, not due to fertile lands or trade routes, but because of the two sects that had dominated the surrounding region for decades, though that balance had recently shifted. Now, only one sect cast its shadow over Thornridge, the Crimson Serpent sect. The sharp tang of incense lingered in the air as Manco Drast walked through the crowded market square. The city was alive with a mix of apprehension and curiosity, a palpable tension humming beneath the surface of daily life. Hawkers shouted their wares, though their voices lacked conviction. Even the town guards, clad in their baron's blue and silver livery, stood straighter than usual, their hands resting anxiously on sword hilts. His gaze drifted toward the towering stone pagoda that loomed over the city's northern quarter, its crimson banners snapping sharply in the breeze. The Azure Blossom Sect's monastery, once a bastion of serenity, now bore the unmistakable scars of battle. Its walls were cracked, its gates torn asunder. Crimson flags draped over its parapets, signifying its conquest. The Crimson Serpent Sect's sigil, a coiled serpent with ruby scales, seemed to sneer at the city below, a silent declaration of victory. Manco Drast veered off the bustling main street, slipping into a shadowy alley where the sounds of the market faded into a muffled hum. The air here was damp and cold, the scent of wet stone mingling with decay. He adjusted the cloak over his shoulders, keeping his face obscured as he moved deeper into the alley. At the end of the narrow passage, a young woman waited, her hood pulled low over her face. She leaned against the wall, arms crossed, her tense posture betraying the caution and weariness of someone constantly on edge. When Manco approached, she straightened, her sharp eyes scanning the alley behind him before settling on his face. "You weren't followed, were you?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Manco shook his head. "I made sure. They're too busy showing off their crimson flags to pay attention to the shadows. She relaxed slightly but didn't let her guard down entirely. Her fingers twitched at her side, brushing the hilt of a dagger hidden beneath her cloak. Her voice turned bitter as she spoke again. I saw Elder Giant today. That bitch. She spat the word, venom dripping from her tone. She was wearing the robes of those crimson bastards without feeling any remorse. Manco's jaw tightened. Giant? He repeated, disbelief and anger mingling in his voice. She swore an oath to protect the Azure Blossom sect. She's the one who taught us the weight of loyalty. And now she wears the serpent like it's a badge of honor. The woman snapped, her fists clenching at her sides. Loyalty meant nothing to her. She was probably just waiting for the right moment to sell us out. Manco stepped closer, his voice low and steady. Did she see you? The woman hesitated, then shook her head. No, I kept to the crowd. She didn't even glance my way. Her expression darkened. Not that she'd recognize me now. I doubt she remembers the faces of the people she betrayed. Good, Manco said, his tone firm. The last thing we need is her sniffing around. Are we really going to do it? We have to. Before they force the young lady, we need to save her. The life was grim for the two. Chapter 317, Thornridge. 2. Manco's expression darkened as the woman Lyrian spoke, her anger matched only by the unspoken weight between them. Their young mistress, Lady Ileana, the heir of the Azure Blossom sect, was now a captive of the Crimson Serpent sect. Once, their lives had been simple. Serving the sect, ensuring Ileana's needs were met, and guarding her path toward becoming the next master of the sect. But now, that life had been reduced to a desperate mission to save the last shred of their once glorious legacy. We have to act fast, Manco said, his voice low but firm. Every moment we wait is another chance for them to tighten their grip on her. Lyrian nodded, though the doubt in her eyes was evident. Ileana, she's strong, but she's just a child. And with Vitaliera gone, her voice caught, and she shook her head, composing herself. How did it come to this? Manco's jaw clenched. He didn't have to answer. They both knew how. The Azure Blossom sect, once thriving and secure under the protection of their guardian beast, Lady Vitaliera, had been betrayed from within. Vitaliera's ethereal presence had been the sect's cornerstone, a mythical being bound to the sect's essence, her strength the source of their unparalleled prosperity. She was their protector, their guide, and their pride. But one fateful day, Vitaliera had weakened inexplicably, her radiant form dimming as if her very essence had been drained. Her strength, which had once repelled any threat to the sect, vanished almost overnight. The elders, who should have rallied around their guardian and prepared for what was to come, instead revealed their true colors. Half of the Azure Blossom sect's elders had already sold themselves to the Crimson Serpent sect, secretly conspiring to deliver not only the sect's heir but also Vitaliera's essence to their new masters. When the Crimson Serpent sect finally struck, it was a merciless onslaught. The sect's defenses were shattered before they could even mount a response. It was as if the enemy had known every detail, every hidden passage, every secret ward, every strength and vulnerability. Manco and Lyrian had fought through the chaos, cutting through the invaders in a desperate attempt to reach Ileana. But by the time they reached her quarters, the sect's heir had already been taken, dragged into the clutches of the Crimson Serpent sect. Lady Vitaliera herself, despite her weakened state, had fought to protect her, but she too had been forced to flee. They had last seen her vanishing into the wilderness, pursued by disciples of the Crimson Serpent sect, her ethereal form flickering like a dying ember. Do you think Vitaliera is still alive? Lyrian asked now, her voice barely a whisper. If she was captured, she isn't, Manco said firmly. They would have announced it if they had her. Vitaliera is too valuable to them to keep quiet. That means she's still out there, hiding, regaining her strength. Lyrian scoffed bitterly. You're more optimistic than I thought. But even if she's alive, she's not here. We're on our own, Manco. Manco met her gaze, his voice unwavering. We're not on our own. We have each other and we still have a purpose. As long as Lady Ileana lives, so does the Azure Blossom sect. That is why we must act today. This is our only chance. In a chamber where the air in the dim was stifling, heavy with the scent of damp stone and decay, a faint flicker of light from a single torch illuminated the figure hanging from the ceiling, casting long, distorted shadows across the walls. Lady Ileana, once the pride of the Azure Blossom sect, hung by her wrists, her arms stretched painfully above her. Her once pristine robes were torn and dirted, her hair matted and disheveled. Trails of grime streaked her pale face, but her gray eyes, though sunken, still held a flicker of defiance. Before her, untouched, sat a simple meal on a wooden tray, a bowl of rice, a small piece of meat, and a cup of water. The food's pristine state stood in sharp contrast to her wretched appearance, a silent testament to her refusal to break. The heavy wooden door creaked open, its rusted hinges groaning in protest. A young man strode into the chamber, the torchlight catching on his immaculate crimson robes embroidered with the sigil of the Crimson Serpent sect. A coiled serpent, its ruby scales glinting like fresh blood. His hair was slicked back, and his face was devoid of scars or blemishes, a stark contrast to the rough disciples of the sect. His eyes gleamed with amusement, and a self-satisfied smirk curved his lips. "Ah," he drawled, stepping closer. "Dear Ileana. Still holding out, I see." His voice echoed in the chamber, smooth and laced with mockery. He stopped a few feet from her, tilting his head as if examining a curious animal. "You've been here for, a week now," he continued, his tone casual. "No attempts to eat. No pleas for mercy. No tears. Quite impressive. Or perhaps incredibly foolish." Ileana lifted her head slowly, her movements strained. Her gaze met his, unflinching. Despite her wretched state, there was no fear in her eyes, only cold defiance. "The Lion Vaynar," she said, her voice hoarse but steady. "The pampered prince of the Crimson Serpent sect. Tell me, does it fill you with pride to gloat over someone who cannot fight back?" The lion chuckled, the sound low and mocking. "Oh, Ileana, you wound me." He stepped closer, his polished boots echoing against the stone floor. "I am simply here to check on you. You're a guest, after all." Her lips twitched into a grim semblance of a smile. "A guest doesn't usually hang from the ceiling like a butchered carcass." "Semantics," the lion replied with a shrug. He crouched slightly, bringing himself to her eye level. "You should feel honored, really. My father may have ordered your capture, but I was the one who ensured you were brought here safely." Ileana scoffed, the sound sharp despite her parched throat. "Safely? Is that what you call this?" The sound rang out like a thunderclap, reverberating off the stone walls. Ileana's head snapped to the side from the force of Thalian's hand, her cheeks stinging and red. Strands of her matted hair fell across her face, obscuring her expression. She didn't cry out, didn't flinch. Instead, she stayed perfectly still, her breathing even as she slowly turned her head back to face him. Her eyes were sharper than ever, blazing with a quiet fury that no slap could extinguish. A faint, defiant smile curved her lips, and despite the reddened mark on her face, her gaze pierced into him like a dagger. "Did that make you feel powerful, the lion?" she asked, her voice calm, yet brimming with disdain. "Striking someone who can't fight back? Is that how the heir of the Crimson Serpent sect defines his strength?" Thalian's composure wavered, his chest heaving as he glared at her. For a moment, his carefully crafted veneer cracked, revealing the volatile anger simmering beneath. And then his hand shot forward, gripping Ileana's face with brutal force. His fingers dug into her cheeks, mushing them painfully, and her head was forced back slightly against the tension in her wrists. The sharp sting of his nails biting into her skin only fueled the ache, but Ileana's glare didn't falter. Her gray eyes burned with unyielding defiance, a silent declaration that no amount of pain would make her cower. Her defiance, that unrelenting fire, only seemed to enrage the lion further. His composure shattered as he leaned in closer, his breath hot and acrid against her face. His smirk was gone, replaced by a sneer that revealed his frustration. "Listen here, you bitch," he hissed, his voice low and venomous. "You are nothing but a mere toy for me from now on. Do you understand that?" His grip tightened, and Ileana's breath hitched slightly. But still, she didn't avert her gaze. If anything, her defiance deepened, her expression a twisted mirror of her disdain for him. He loomed over her, a man desperate to assert control, and she refused to give it to him. Thalian's sneer deepened, his voice dripping with mockery as he continued. "Do you know why I haven't started yet? Why I haven't shown you the true meaning of submission?" He leaned even closer, his lips barely inches from her ear. "Because of that cat of yours," he chuckled darkly, the sound grating and cruel. "I know she's still out there somewhere. You won't tell us where, but don't worry, we'll find her. When we do—" He pulled back slightly, his eyes gleaming with malice. "You'll watch as we tear her apart, piece by piece. And when she's gone, you'll finally understand that you have nothing left. Not your sect, not your beast, not even your pride." Ileana's chest tightened at his words, the venom in his tone cutting deeper than the physical pain. Yet, despite the ache in her jaw and the trembling in her exhausted body, she forced her lips into a faint, mocking smile beneath his grip. Tap, 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 tap. Just then, suddenly the sharp sound of hurried footsteps echoed through the oppressive chamber, cutting through the tense silence. The door creaked open, and a disciple of the Crimson Serpent sect burst in, his crimson robes disheveled and his face pale with panic. "Young master," the disciple gasped, bowing hastily despite his urgency. "We are under attack." Chapter 318. Mercenaries also have their work. Slash. The streets were painted with the crimson sprawl of fresh blood. Splash. Amid the chaos, Zirkle wiped his blade against the cloak of a fallen disciple, his mismatched eyes narrowing as he glanced around. The once pristine crimson robes of the Crimson Serpent sect now lay tattered, their wearers reduced to lifeless forms sprawled across the cobblestone streets. The metallic tang of blood hung thick in the air, mingling with the faint scent of burning incense that lingered from the sect's rituals. Zirkle's axe gleamed, still dripping with the blood of his most recent opponent. Around him, four other mad dogs stood in varying states of readiness, their weapons bloodied but their spirits undeterred. Zirkle exhaled heavily, shaking his head as he glanced at the carnage. His gaze drifted upward, toward the looming sect compound ahead. A part of him still couldn't believe they were here, let alone succeeding. His thoughts churned, replaying the last 3 days in a loop as if trying to find some logic in the madness. "We're going to take down the Crimson Serpent sect." Those words, they still echoed in his head, sharp and absurd. They were spoken so matter-of-factly by their employer, Lucavion, as if wiping out an entire sect was no different than handling a particularly unruly gang. Zirkle snorted, kicking aside the body of a disciple as he muttered under his breath, "This guy's not just insane. He's completely unhinged." For 3 days, Zirkle had traveled with him, watching him from the saddle of his horse. He couldn't wrap his head around the man. Lucavion was different, not in the way nobles who played at being warriors were different, but something deeper. He wasn't just fearless. He acted as if the rules that bound others didn't apply to him at all. It was unnerving. How can 20 men be enough to take down an entire sect? Zirkle thought, glancing at one of the other mad dogs who was wiping his blade on a crimson robe. If it were that easy, everyone would be doing it. The question had plagued him since the moment Lucavion had made the declaration. It wasn't just bold. It was outright suicidal. The Crimson Serpent sect was no small-time operation. They had numbers, resources, and decades of entrenched power in Thornridge. And yet, here they were, cutting through the sect's disciples like reapers in a field. The real question, though, the one that Zirkle couldn't stop turning over in his mind, was why he had gone along with it. He could have refused. He could have stayed in the camp, left Lucavion to march alone into his doom. But he hadn't. And the reason was as infuriatingly simple as it was compelling. If you can survive until the end, you'll earn 1 gold coin for every kill. The promise of that reward had silenced every protest in the camp. 1 gold coin per kill, an offer so absurdly generous it could only come from a madman. For most mercenaries, an average job might pay 50 silvers if they were lucky. A gold coin was a king's ransom in comparison. And so they had followed. Not out of loyalty, not out of trust, but out of greed, and maybe, for some, a curiosity about the man who had made such an outrageous offer. Now, standing in the blood-soaked streets of Thornridge, Zirkle found himself questioning more than just the promise of coin. What kind of person throws around that kind of money? What does he actually want? Zirkle's thoughts were interrupted as another wave of disciples emerged from the shadows of a nearby alley, their crimson robes fluttering like bloodied banners. They moved with coordinated precision, their weapons glinting in the dim light. For a moment, the air stilled, the tension crackling like a live wire. More of them, one of the mad dogs muttered, hefting his mace with a grin. Looks like we're not done yet, Zirkle grunted, raising his axe. Form up. Don't let them surround you. In the end, he would just be doing his job. Create chaos all around the city, make them come at you, and leave the rest to me. Those words still rang in his ears, absurdly confident and yet delivered with such calm certainty that Zirkle couldn't help but follow them. He'd thought Lucavion a lunatic then. Hell, he still thought that. But as the night unfolded, a darker part of him couldn't deny the intrigue. He wanted to see what this man was truly capable of. And that was why they had split into 5 groups, scattering across Thornridge like wild dogs unleashed. If there was one thing the mad dogs excelled at, it was creating havoc. Come, you bastards, Zirkle growled, his smirk widening as he raised his axe. The crimson-robed disciples surged forward, their cries of anger mingling with the crackle of flames and the distant shouts of civilians fleeing the carnage. Around him, the other mad dogs braced for impact, their blood-streaked faces alight with feral glee. The first disciple lunged at Zirkle, a curved blade flashing toward his throat. Zirkle sidestepped with practiced ease, his axe coming down in a brutal arc that cleaved through the disciple's chest. Blood sprayed across the cobblestones as the body crumpled, but Zirkle was already moving, his axe whirling to meet the next attacker. Keep it tight, Zirkle barked to his men, his voice cutting through the chaos. Don't let them pin you down. The grand chamber of the Crimson Serpent sect was a stark contrast to the dim prison below. Lavish red banners hung from the high ceiling, embroidered with the sect's coiled serpent sigil in golden thread. The room's centerpiece was a massive obsidian throne, its jagged edges gleaming ominously in the torchlight. Sitting upon it was Vaelric Vanar, the sect master of the Crimson Serpent sect, his aura exuding menace. Or at least that was what the whole place around him gave the vibe of. Vaelric was a man of imposing stature, his crimson robes draped around him like the folds of a storm. His sharp, angular features seemed carved from stone, and his piercing amber eyes burned with an intensity that made even his most loyal disciples avert their gaze. In his hand, he toyed with a black jade serpent figurine, his fingers curling and uncurling around it as he listened to the frantic report before him. "You dare disturb me for this?" he growled, his deep voice reverberating through the chamber like distant thunder. The disciple who knelt before him trembled, sweat beading on his brow. "Sect Master, please, it is urgent. We are under attack. A group has been targeting our people around the city. They've already killed 20 of our disciples." Vaelric's hands stilled, his grip tightening on the figurine until his knuckles turned white. His eyes narrowed, and his presence seemed to swell, filling the chamber with an oppressive weight. "Who dares?" he said, his voice dangerously low. "Who dares to challenge us and attack us on our own land?" The disciple hesitated, his voice quivering as he spoke. We don't know, Sect Master. They appear to be a group of mercenaries. Their motives are unclear. They are attacking indiscriminately, cutting down anyone bearing our emblem." Vaelric rose from his throne, his robes billowing like blood-red smoke. The figurine in his hand shattered under his grip, shards of jade falling to the floor. "Mercenaries?" he repeated, his voice rising to a roar. "A bunch of hired blades dares to defy the Crimson Serpent sect? To kill my disciples? The disciple flinched, his head bowing lower. Why yes, sect master. They're moving quickly, hitting key outposts and retreating before reinforcements arrive. We've lost control of the eastern district, and they're pushing toward the main gates. Veilric's fury blazed like an inferno. 20 of our disciples, slaughtered, and you come to me with nothing but excuses. He took a step forward, the sheer weight of his presence forcing the disciple to press his forehead to the floor. How is this possible? How did they breach our defenses? Answer me. That just happened. Veilric's glare burned with unrelenting intensity as he paced the grand chamber, his crimson robes trailing behind him like flames licking at the air. The disciple cowered, trembling under the weight of his rage. They're not coordinated, the disciple stammered, his voice quivering. Sect master, they fight like madmen. They wreak havoc wherever they go. They don't even care about bystanders. They strike fast, they kill without mercy, and they vanish. Veilric's expression twisted into a scowl. Madmen? A pack of rabid dogs causing chaos under our noses. His fists clenched as his voice rose. What are the city guards doing about this? The disciple hesitated, his shoulders hunching further. Sect master. The city guards aren't responding. Veilric froze mid-step, his fiery gaze snapping toward the disciple. What did you just say? The man gulped, his voice barely above a whisper. The city guards, they've done nothing. They aren't intervening. For a moment, the chamber was silent, save for the faint crackle of torches along the walls. Then Veilric laughed, a cold, humorless sound that sent shivers down the disciple's spine. Of course they haven't, Veilric said, his tone dripping with derision. That pathetic lordling who rules this city. Did you really think he'd dare lift a finger without my permission? I crushed his authority beneath my heel long ago. He smirked, though the fury in his eyes remained. That was how I silenced the Azure Blossom sect without interference. That fool was so easy to intimidate. He became little more than a puppet. Veilric turned abruptly, his robes swishing as he closed the distance between him and the kneeling disciple. So, now you come to me, he hissed, his voice low but venomous, because these so-called mercenaries are rampaging unchecked, and no one is left to stop them? The disciple nodded frantically, his forehead pressed to the cold floor. Why yes, sect master. Forgive me. How many of these vermin are there? Veilric demanded, his tone sharp as a blade. We've identified 5 different groups, sect master, the disciple replied quickly. Each group consists of 4 people. They move separately, but their timing is precise. Wherever they strike, they leave behind carnage before we can respond. Chapter 319. Mercenaries also have their work, too. Veilric stood motionless for a moment, his fiery gaze fixed on the disciple as his mind churned. The fact that a mere 20 individuals, divided into groups of 4, could cause such chaos, even against the Crimson Serpent sect's disciples, spoke volumes about their strength. The average strength of their disciples was at the peak of 1 star, with a few promising individuals reaching early 2-star awakening. But these attackers, if they were capable of such precision and carnage, they couldn't be below 2-star, and some might even be stronger. 20 men, Veilric murmured, his voice low and deadly. And yet you dare to tell me this is the work of mere mercenaries? The disciple flinched, lowering his head further. Sect master, their techniques. They don't match any local groups. They're skilled, and they fight as though they've trained for years. Veilric's lips curled into a sneer. Skilled or not, they are vermin. Their strength is insignificant next to mine. But for the sake of appearances, he turned, his robe swishing, and gestured sharply toward the guards near the door. Summon Elder Giant and the others. I want elders of at least peak 3-star awakening leading the charge. Let them bring these fools to their knees. One of the guards hesitated, glancing at Veilric before bowing deeply. Sect master, Elder Giant is preoccupied with overseeing the interrogation of the Azure Blossom sect's former disciples. Veilric's glare snapped toward him, his amber eyes blazing. Then relieve her of that duty. Those broken dogs can wait. He straightened, his aura expanding with suffocating intensity, sending a ripple of unease through everyone present. Do you think I would entrust this matter to anyone less? Elder Giant will handle this personally. The guard nodded quickly and left the chamber, not daring to look back. Veilric's attention returned to the kneeling disciple, his sharp features twisted into a scowl. Make no mistake, these attacks threaten more than just our reputation. They undermine the entire foundation of what we've built here. For sects like the Crimson Serpent sect or the Azure Blossom sect, power was everything. Their reach might not have extended to the grand capitals of the empire, but in the countryside and smaller cities, they were undisputed rulers. Having even a 3-star awakened elder was a sign of strength, one that demanded respect and submission from the surrounding populace. That strength was why they could collect protection taxes and fees, imposing their will without resistance. For Veilric, maintaining this facade of power was paramount. A threat like this, an organized, deadly group that could cut down disciples and destabilize their influence, could not go unanswered. The Crimson Serpent sect's grip on Thornridge and its surrounding regions had to remain ironclad. Send the elders, he repeated, his voice colder now. Crush these insects. I want their corpses hung at the city gates as a reminder to all. Anyone who defies us will meet the same fate. The disciple nodded frantically. Yes, sect master. As the disciple scrambled to obey, Veilric turned toward the grand window that overlooked the city. The skyline of Thornridge stretched out before him, a mix of stone buildings and bustling streets. His gaze lingered on the distant horizon, where the fading light of the sun cast long shadows over the city. His thoughts darkened as he considered the timing of the attacks. 2 years ago, the Crimson Serpent sect was different than how it was just now. Back then, even Veilric himself had been stuck at mid-4-star awakening, unable to break through no matter how hard he pushed. And with the sect master of the Azure Blossom sect being mid-4-star rank as him, his sect was actually weaker than the Azure sect thanks to the Guardian Beast, which they called. In fact, he hated the feeling though his core. After all, he was a lot more talented than that bitch, and he was much more hardworking. But because of the existence of the Vitaliera, the Guardian Beast, she was able to advance while he was stuck dealing with the matters of his sect. His ambition had burned brighter than his strength, and he'd known the sect's survival would require more than sheer determination. It was then that they had come. The memory of that fateful meeting sent a shiver down his spine. Their offer had been simple: power in exchange for allegiance. The means by which they delivered on their promise remained a mystery, but the results were undeniable. Veilric had surged past his limits, reaching the peak of 4-star awakening, and the sect had grown stronger under his rule. But the deal had come with strings, and now those strings were tightening. Where is that cat? Veilric muttered, his voice low and dangerous. The guards stiffened, exchanging uneasy glances. None dared to answer immediately. Did you not hear me? Veilric snapped, his gaze slicing through them like a blade. Where is Vitaliera? Sect master, for elders are already looking for her through the shadow thicket. It is just, you know that place? It has been a fucking year. Veilric's hand slammed against the black stone wall, the force of his rage shaking the chamber. A crack spidered through the smooth surface, dust crumbling at his feet. His amber eyes burned with barely restrained fury as he turned back toward the guards, his presence swelling like a storm about to break. A year, he roared, his voice echoing through the chamber. It has been a fucking year. And you're telling me she still eluded us? How many elders have I sent into that cursed shadow thicket? How many of our resources have I burned for this hunt? Only for you to return empty-handed every time. The guards flinched, their heads bowing further, none daring to meet his gaze. One of them, a younger man trembling under Veilric's oppressive aura, hesitated before speaking. Sect master, the shadow thicket is vast and treacherous. Even with the elder's strength, the place is unnatural. To shifts, it misleads. Enough! Veilric snapped, his voice cutting through the explanation like a blade. He advanced on the trembling guard, his expression a mask of wrath. Do you think I don't know the dangers of that place? Do you think I care about excuses? The guard fell silent, swallowing hard as Veilric loomed over him. Veilric stepped back, running a hand through his slicked-back hair, his fingers trembling with frustration. He turned toward the window once more, staring out at the darkening horizon. His thoughts raced, the weight of the promised time pressing down on him like a vice. The deal. The memory of that meeting was as vivid as ever. The shadowy figures, their impossible presence, their cryptic smiles as they made their offer. They had given him what he'd longed for, strength beyond his limits, the power to crush the Azure Blossom sect and claim Thornridge as his own. But their terms had been clear. Vitaliera. The beast's essence was the price they demanded, and if he failed to deliver, the consequences would be dire. The whispers of what would happen to his sect, to him, if he failed, they had haunted his dreams ever since. And now the promised time was approaching. Sigh. Veilric exhaled sharply, his shoulders rising and falling as he tried to steady the storm raging within him. The weight of his failures, the looming consequences of the deal, and the chaos erupting in his city gnawed at his composure. He closed his eyes for a brief moment before opening them, his gaze sharp and calculating. "Bring her," he said coldly, his voice low but firm. "Now." The guards exchanged uneasy glances before one of them bowed and hurried out of the chamber. Veilric didn't move, his back to the room as he stared out the window, the city lights flickering like distant stars. The air in the room grew heavier as the moments stretched, his impatience simmering beneath the surface. Minutes later, the heavy doors creaked open again. The sound of dragging footsteps echoed through the chamber as two guards entered, a figure between them. She stumbled slightly as they brought her forward, her hands bound with enchanted cuffs that glimmered faintly in the torchlight. Veilric turned slowly, his eyes narrowing as they fell upon the woman. She stood tall despite the bindings, her posture graceful but rigid. Her long, dark hair framed her strikingly beautiful face, but it was her eyes that drew the most attention, or rather, the lack of life within them. Her pale gray eyes, once filled with vitality and pride, were now shallow pools of emptiness, devoid of any spark of resistance or hope. She was a ghost of the person she had once been. "Leave us," Veilric commanded, his voice cutting through the silence like a blade. "All of you, get out." The guards hesitated, exchanging wary looks before bowing and stepping out of the chamber. The door shut behind them with a heavy thud, sealing the room in oppressive quiet. Crawl. It was his time to play. Chapter 320, Crimson Serpent Sect. The heavy doors of the Crimson Serpent Sect's grand hall creaked open, a pair of disciplined guards bowing low as 6 elders strode in. Their robes flowed like waves of blood, embroidered with the coiled serpent emblem that marked their authority. Their presence was imposing, their combined aura a testament to the sect's strength. Near the center of the hall stood Veilric's aide, a slender man with sharp, calculating eyes, and the trembling disciple who had brought the news of the attacks. Veilric himself remained seated on the jagged obsidian throne, his amber gaze fixed on the elders, a faint smirk curling his lips. His stillness was as commanding as the elders' motion, an unspoken declaration of his superiority. The elders stopped several paces before him, their faces a mixture of irritation and restrained fury. Elder Giant, her silver-streaked hair catching the torchlight, folded her arms, her gaze sharp and cold. "Speak," she commanded, her tone carrying the weight of authority. Veilric's aide stepped forward, his voice calm but precise, a sharp contrast to the disciples' earlier panic. "Esteemed elders, the sect is under attack. A group of mercenaries, organized and skilled, has struck multiple locations across Thornridge, targeting our disciples and outposts. They have already claimed the lives of 20 of our own." A ripple of outrage passed through the elders, their expressions darkening. Elder Varos, his hulking frame tense with anger, let out a low growl. "Mercenaries? They dare to challenge us on our own soil? What arrogance!" The aide continued, undeterred. "These are no ordinary mercenaries. They fight with precision and ferocity, their techniques unfamiliar. They strike swiftly and retreat before reinforcements can arrive. "They're cowards, then," sneered one of the 3-star elders, a wiry man with a perpetual smirk. Rats scurrying in the dark. The disciple, still trembling, interjected nervously, elders, their tactics are unorthodox. They split into 5 groups, each hitting a different target. This chaos, deliberate chaos. Elder Giant's eyes narrowed, her sharp gaze fixing on the disciple. "And you're here to tell us you failed to contain a group of hired blades?" The disciple flinched, his head bowing lower. Enough." The aide's voice cut through the room, calm yet seething with authority. He didn't rise but leaned forward slightly, his amber eyes gleaming with menace. "The elders are more than capable of handling this. You have wasted enough of my time." He gestured dismissively, and the aide took a step back, his expression neutral. The disciple scrambled to bow and retreat, grateful to escape the suffocating tension of the grand hall. As the disciple fled the hall, the room was left in a silence heavy with tension. The 6 elders stood rigid, their combined aura oppressive, but beneath their composed exteriors, a crackling animosity simmered. Elder Varos's piercing gaze settled on Elder Giant, his lips curling into a sneer. "It's almost poetic, isn't it?" he began, his deep voice laced with mockery. "Rats scurrying into our sect, only for more rats to strike from the shadows. Your kind seems to attract trouble." Giant's silver-streaked head turned slowly toward him, her expression impassive but her sharp eyes gleaming like frost on a blade. "Careful, Varos. It's unbecoming for an elder to let jealousy cloud his judgment." Another of the original Crimson Serpent sect elders, a wiry man with a perpetual smirk, snorted derisively. "Jealousy? That's rich, coming from someone who sold out her own sect to climb higher. Rats like you don't inspire envy, Giant. Contempt, perhaps, but never envy." Giant's 2 allies, both defectors from the Azure Blossom sect, stiffened visibly. One, a burly man with a scar across his chin, took a step forward, his fists clenched. "We joined because we saw the truth," he growled. "The Azure Blossom sect was weak and doomed to collapse. We strengthened this sect with our knowledge and skills. Yet you treat us like lepers." Varos laughed, the sound harsh and derisive. "Strengthened? Don't make me laugh. The only thing you strengthened was your own coffers with the rewards you begged for." The other 2 were silent, and it was Giant who had broken the silence. "Enough. Let's not waste any time with the pointless talk." The tense silence hung heavily in the hall as Giant's calm but cutting words settled between them. For a brief moment, even Varos seemed to hesitate, his sneer faltering under the weight of her icy demeanor. But his pride was not so easily silenced. As Giant turned sharply toward the doors, her 2 allies falling into step behind her, Varos's deep voice rang out once more, dripping with mockery. "You rats should stay here as you are. The Crimson Serpent sect has no need for traitors to dirty their hands. We're more than enough to deal with this matter." Giant paused mid-stride, her back to him, but she didn't bother turning around. "Do as you please, Varos," she said, her voice dismissive. "Your petty provocations don't concern me." Her 2 allies exchanged glances, their expressions hardening in silent agreement. Without a word, they followed her out of the hall, their footsteps steady and unhurried, as if Varos's taunts were little more than the barking of an inconsequential dog. Varos's sneer twisted into a grimace, his jaw clenching so tightly that the veins in his neck bulged. "Wretched wench," he muttered under his breath, his fists curling at his sides. "Let's see how long you can hold it in. Your arrogance will catch up with you, Giant." The wiry elder at his side smirked, clearly enjoying the exchange. "Shall we let her make a fool of herself, or do we follow? Wouldn't want her and her ilk taking credit for our work." Varos let out a low growl, his sharp eyes narrowing. "She's desperate to prove her worth. If we move faster, we'll gather the credibility before she even gets a chance." With that, Varos strode toward the doors, his heavy footsteps echoing in the grand hall. The remaining elders exchanged a final glance, their mutual disdain for the defectors evident, before following their leader. The large double doors groaned shut behind them, leaving the chamber empty save for the lingering tension. But this was a fatal mistake. A mistake that they would come to understand soon. The thick silence following the elder's departure was broken by the faint rustling of foliage outside the Crimson Serpent sect's grand entrance. From the shadows of the twisted ornamental bushes, a cloaked figure emerged, his movements so fluid and precise that it seemed the environment had shaped itself around his concealment. The young man pulled back his hood, revealing a sharp, angular face partially obscured by the edge of the shadowed cloak. He brushed some stray leaves off the fabric, muttering to himself in a tone that carried both admiration and annoyance. This cloak really is something. Even a 4-star cultivator wouldn't notice me unless they deliberately focused their senses. His voice was soft, almost reflective, but there was a glint of satisfaction in his eyes. The silence of the night shattered as the heavy presence of the young man disrupted the stillness. From the guard post at the gate of the Crimson Serpent sect, 2 sentinels stirred, their attention snapping toward the cloaked figure standing unervingly still. "Halt!" one barked, his voice steady but wary. The man's sharp features were partially obscured by his helm, but the tension in his stance was clear. "Who are you? What are you doing here?" The other guard shifted, his grip tightening on the long spear he carried. His narrowed eyes scanned the stranger, suspicion flaring in his posture. Before either could make another move, the young man's hand darted to his side, drawing a sleek, thin blade in a single fluid motion. The air around him seemed to quiver as the blade caught the dim light, a faint shimmer of black starlight dancing along its edge. Swoosh! In one impossibly fast arc, the blade flashed, cutting through the silence. For a heartbeat, there was no sound, just the faint hum of the weapon slicing the air. Spurt! Blood sprayed out in twin arcs, painting the ground and gate in a macabre display. The 2 guards froze, their bodies rigid before their heads slipped from their shoulders, thudding onto the ground with a grim finality. The young man sheathed his blade in one fluid motion, his expression calm, unbothered by the carnage he had just wrought. He glanced down at the bodies, the faintest hint of a smile curling his lips as though he had merely swept aside a minor inconvenience. "Now," he murmured to himself, his tone almost conversational, "shall we erase the Crimson Serpent sect?" With that, he stepped through the gates, his cloak swirling behind him as he moved with inhuman speed. The sect grounds blurred around him, the world narrowing to the path ahead as he dashed through with purpose. The faint shimmer of black starlight around his blade caught the torch's glow, leaving streaks of eerie luminance in the air as he dispatched each foe who dared to cross his path. Guards and disciples fell like leaves before the storm, their cries silenced before they could even echo. Blood. Silence.
Hello everyone. We now have a Discord server. Join us for faster updates, discussions about your favorite novels, and exclusive Discord-only content. Don't miss out. See you there. Scan the QR code on the screen or enter any of the displayed links into your browser to join our Discord.